Well, two videos today. What a thrill. Because my neighbor finished mowing their lawn, I was able to come outside for the second one. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about your excellent answers to the discussion board question about scratching the car in the Target parking lot. I really like this problem because it's a problem that we could all face. It's a problem that many of us have faced or that we have been at the other end of, as some of you discussed. And it's also a problem, I think, that reveals something about how we make moral decisions. So I want to talk broadly about the three different ways in which three different methodologies that people could use for normative ethics that were reflected in your answers, right? So thinking about whether or not you should leave a note or wait for the person whose car you scratched to come out and talk to them, a number of you really sort of talked about the rules that you had learned that you're supposed to follow. At least one person mentioned the golden rule, but then there was also a sort of general sense that it's important to be honest, that you should be honest under all circumstances. And sort of general rules. And then I would think more broadly, some of you talked about general principles, respecting the dignity of other people by being concerned about how they would feel. The golden rule is kind of a version of that, right? That says, how would you feel if someone else scratched your car? And it asks you to ascribe the same dignity to others that you would want them to ascribe to you. So all those answers fall, I would say, more or less roughly into the deontological territory. So remember, a deontological approach to ethics is an approach that's based on following rules and principles. And most people, I think, I'll say a little bit about this at the end, most people don't use just one methodology in making their ethical decisions, but often one methodology dominates, right? So if you're concerned particularly about rules, if the moral problem leaves you looking for the rule that you should follow, then that tends to be a deontological approach. Another approach that was less prominent, in fact, I don't think many of you really use this approach, which is interesting because it's the most common approach, I think, to the resolution of ethical problems, is a consequentialist approach, right? This looks at good outcomes, right? What are the outcomes that we're looking for? And if we talk about a consequentialist approach as a good outcome for the self, that's pretty straightforward. But we could also talk about good outcomes for everybody, right? So a consequentialist approach that looked at the damage to the other person's car and determined that it wasn't a lot of damage and that they had not been harmed and there was no bad outcome that truly needed to be addressed, that approach might allow you to not leave a note. I think at least one person suggested that if their financial situation was significantly straitened and they could not really afford to pay for damage or the possible hike in insurance, that they would leave a note as an expression of respect for the person. In other words, the good outcome that they're seeking there is that the person feels respected, right? I think that's a pretty interesting way to think about it. So consequentialism tends to look at outcomes, right? And a consequentialist might see this as not really a big deal because no harm was done, where a deontologist would see it as an opportunity to follow the rules. The third approach that a number of you incorporated in different ways into your responses is what I'm calling a virtue ethics approach, right? So virtue ethics is the approach to ethics that asks what are the good qualities, the good virtues, right? Virtue is another word for good quality, that we are trying to inculcate in ourselves, that we're trying to practice, but also that we are trying to learn as we do them, right? So where the consequentialist asked, what good outcome am I seeking in doing this? And the deontologist asks, what rule should I be following in doing this? The virtue ethicist may ask, what would the good person do here? Or what action would help me to become a better person? And those of you who had various versions, and a number of you did, of something like, I don't want to be that gal, or I don't want to be that guy that doesn't leave a note, right? You say, I want to be the kind of person that does this. That's a pretty strong virtue approach. And I think virtue ethics is interesting. It's kind of a preferred way of doing ethics in the Catholic tradition. I think it fits nicely with natural law, because it really does think about the moral development of the person acting. So if you looked at that problem and said, well, what do I want to do to be the kind of person I want to be here? Or what would a person that I think is a good person, what would they do here? That's a virtue ethics approach. Now, as I said, most people use a mixture of these, right? So I think that a lot of people do follow the rules, but they will bend that in the event of pursuing a good outcome. But I think there are a lot of cases where sometimes our sense of who we're trying to be can be a little bit in tension with outcomes, right? I think about this with parenting a lot. You seek good outcomes for your children, but you also want to try to be a good parent, which can mean a lot of different things. And sometimes the being the good parent, or the parent who appears to be the good parent, can be a little bit at odds with what you'd think of as a good outcome for your kid, or at least it can be somewhat in tension with that. So those three approaches, I think, illustrated very nicely in your thoughtful responses, and I left feeling confident that I would park next to any of you in the Target parking lot. Have a great day.